Baseball season is upon us. No more fawning over hitters popping homers and live at-bats against teammates. Games are underway and the WBC starts on March 5th. So here's what you should pay attention to this spring. The challenge system, super obvious, but like the pitch clock, this will be a universally fantastic league adjustment. Now, there are numerous elements of this rule that are really interesting to consider. If we believe that the results of the challenge system test we saw last spring will be representative of the 2026 regular season, then we can predict a few things. First off, we're going to see about 3 to 4 pitches challenged in any given game. The average game has roughly 300 pitches thrown. Just under half of those are called strikes and balls in a given game, and just under 3% of called pitches were challenged. So that's how we get to our 3 to 4 challenges a game. When these challenges occur is also interesting. MLB reported that players challenged more in high leverage counts. And yet in those situations, they were less successful than they were in early count situations in terms of overturning calls. Who is challenging is another interesting angle. The pitcher, catcher, and batter are all allowed and have to do so immediately, basically within about 2 seconds or so. Umpires have discretion to nullify a challenge if they think one of these parties was aided. Last spring, it was pretty clear that among those 3 options, catchers had the highest success rate when challenging, by a lot over pitchers actually. This led to some analysts online proposing that teams ban pitchers from challenging at all. Chris Sale even came out and said that he wouldn't challenge a pitch this season, which is perhaps a peek into the psyche of a pitcher on the mound. A lot is deferred to catchers, which gets to a larger point of mine that catchers' value probably isn't totally accounted for in wins above replacement or WAR. They do a lot more as players than they get credit for, and that's why I would have voted for Cal Raleigh for AL MVP, but we're getting off topic here. One effect I did want to talk about is how the challenge system might once again influence the strike zone size, because it did last year. I did a video last year about how MLB incentivized umpires to change how they were calling the zone, in part because I think they anticipated the challenge system coming. And what MLB did effectively shrunk the strike zone. Historically, the zone was a bit wide. Well, a bit wide might be an understatement. Go back to 1997 and watch the NLCS. Livan Hernandez was getting some calls in that one. I think MLB knew that if they added the challenge system in 2025 without an adjustment to contract the zone in a bit, it may not really look good on umpires if they were being overturned at a really high percent on these borderline calls. There was a great post by a user on X showing exactly how the zone has changed. First, let me show you 2022 compared to 2025, which kind of encompasses some of this contraction that I've been talking about. But let's also look at 2007 and compare that to 2022. Now that is a really dramatic change. Pitchers started getting way more at the top of the zone and the bottom of the zone and far less inside and out. It is absolutely correct to say the zone got more accurate over the last 15 to 20 years of baseball, regardless of how much you dislike umpires. And you won't be able to be as critical around umpires this season either, because according to the Chicago Sun-Times' Jeff Agris, that pitch dot we're used to seeing where if it's out of the zone, it's a hollow circle. If it's in the zone in a strike, it's filled in. That's going away, and this season we're just getting a universal dot no matter where the ball is across the strike zone. I imagine it's an effort by the league to kind of mitigate any risk of potential cheating around the challenge system, but I could also report that some RSNs are considering taking that standard strike zone box that we're used to seeing, that white outline that's been on screens for a while, and kind of changing it such that we only see the corners. The idea here is this will create some ambiguity on the edges and top bottom for viewers to be a bit more interested in the results of the ABS. And again, I think the ultimate premise here is we as viewers are going to be less critical towards umpires because we're just not going to be as confident as to whether a pitch is a ball or a strike. I will admit at this point, it kind of just seems like we just take the strike zone box off entirely and just put a pitch dot on screen, but that's just my opinion. But let's get back to the implications of the challenge system on the strike zone. From 22 to 25, as the strike zone contracted ever so slightly, which I just showed, pitchers started putting the ball in that textbook strike zone more. 48.7% of pitches were in the zone in 2022 compared to 50.7% last year. Now, the league walk rate actually remains somewhat unchanged, but I wonder if a cut to that is coming over the next few years. as the league starts to emphasize strikes. This was the highest zone rate in the pitch tracking era, which spans all the way back to 2008. So if somebody says they just don't throw strikes like they used to, well, they actually do. And their stuff is better because they're throwing 2.5 ticks harder on average than they were back in 2008. Pitchers are in fact very good at their jobs, and they may get even better with the challenge system. I have a theory that I presented in another video that the high breaking ball is going to become more of a weapon in early count spots or even deep count spots because it's one of the most frequently missed calls in this sport. One that's often in the zone but called a ball at one of the highest rates. It's also swung at very little, aka it's also somewhat of an easy way to get a called strike. The league finding that challenges are more successful when they're earlier in the count may apply here too. If you're a team that can hone in on kind of an odd breaking balls up approach, which is very unconventional, and you're comfortable using your challenges here, perhaps you can give your pitchers some extra count leverage with very little risk of loss. The other element I've kind of buried here is that you only get 2 challenges and you retain them if you win. So perhaps there's a tendency to just save challenges until late in the game when win probability swings are often at their highest. This means if you're using challenges in the first inning on this high breaking ball approach, you better be really confident that that pitch is going to be overturned in your favor. Everything I'm talking about there is definitely a bit more inside baseball. We could probably boil down this challenge system to 2 primary questions. The central one is around who is challenging and who is the most successful. Who is challenging? I'll predict that it's heavily biased towards catchers, especially based on what we saw around the success rate from the prior spring training. Which teams are most successful? I'm very excited for those leaderboards on Baseball Savant. We'll probably need a bit of a sample to determine that. But I would imagine there's some correlation between catcher quality from a defensive standpoint and zone understanding, which then would correlate back to who overturns or is the most consistently correct in terms of overturning these challenges, if in fact catchers are the ones doing a lot of that challenging. The second question here is, how does the strike zone change? My prediction is that umpires are pretty set and we'll see very similar to the 2025 zone. But the larger question that I kind of alluded to is that I wonder if the incentives around being in the zone more, especially in early count situations, are greater. This is something I've mentioned in the past. I'm not going to do like an overall trend video this season. Last year I predicted the year of the pitch mix, which very much turned out to be correct. I don't know if I have that overarching prediction this season. So what I'm going to do instead is kind of play around and bury it in here that I think we'll see a zone rate jump or a strike jump, especially in early count situations. And maybe we're starting to get to this theme of teams prioritizing strikes, and especially early count strikes more. Next, what I wanted to talk about is more related to how you as a viewer analyze spring training. This season, we're getting access to every single Arizona and Florida park from a StatCast perspective because of the implementation of this challenge system, which is awesome. Now, with that power comes great responsibility. Please stop citing slash lines of everyday major league players who are facing AA and quad A pitching. Baseball Reference has a metric called opponent quality on any player's page that'll get going once spring starts, which is a fantastic way to check yourself if you think you're getting carried away with a hitter mashing or a pitcher shoving. This feels even more relevant given my guess that the average spring player in MLB will be worse in World Baseball Classic years like this season as opposed to non-WBC years. If you want to get excited about something in spring, connect it back to metrics that have the most direct connection to a player's skill. For hitters, you would think this is barrel rate, but spring barrel rate doesn't have that strong of a correlation to that season's barrel rate, primarily because the sample size and the quality of those barrels in spring, basically the level of pitcher that they're off, can be kind of fluky. So I prefer to look at a combo of just strikeouts and walks, basically plate discipline, combined with some kind of top-end exit velocity metric, like a max exit velocity. Spring strikeouts have a better correlation to in-season strikeout and walk rates than something like barrel rate does. So that's why it's probably better to lean in that direction. And I will admit, the correlations here aren't like amazing, so keep that in mind. I'm more so saying believe strikeout and walk rates more than you believe a given barrel rate, not make strikeout and walk rates the only thing you care about and throw away everything else. I personally like max exit velocity, as long as the ball isn't kind of topped directly into the ground, because that's getting at top end outcomes in terms of raw explosiveness and force production. Guys who have made material swing or body composition changes usually see some kind of jump in a number like this. And yes, we've seen a lot of, wow, this guy added 20 pounds this offseason, or AI adjusted images of Roman Anthony. Talking to some strength people, lean muscle gain is capped at around 2 to 2.5 pounds per month. So in a 4-month offseason, you can, at the top end, in a more amateur athlete, put on like 10 pounds of muscle in one offseason. The problem we run into is when everybody just reports the body weight gain as the muscle gain. These are not the same thing. Now, for pitchers, the data I want to focus on is similar to that of hitters. Our baseline focus should be on strikeouts and walks, with a central focus on velocity. Spring velocity has a really nice correlation to in-season velocity for a given pitcher. The key is just waiting for that sample to build up a bit. Everybody is going to overreact early in spring when outings are shorter and velo is up because those outings are shorter. If you see a guy who sat 95 last year sitting 98 for a 2 to 3 inning spring outing, it might be a velo bump, but it's probably not a 2 to 3 tick bump. Ryan Weathers was one of the more notable, oh wow, he looks a lot better guys in 2025. He sat 95 miles per hour on his four-seamer in 2023. He jumped about a tick in 2024. And then he spiked to 97.7 in spring last year before falling back to about 96.9 in the regular season. And then, unfortunately, he blew out. A good proxy that guys usually give back about 1 to 1.5 ticks from those juicy first outings of spring training. And it's also a lesson that velocity is one of the strongest correlations to injury in the data we have access to publicly. Although it is king, yeah, it generally results in some spike in injury risk. Now, I, like many others, am a huge fan of using projections as a baseline to come up with breakout picks and guys I want to flag plant, so to speak, in the coming season. It's really important to look on the league level to understand how insane it is for you to say a guy with a 4.3 ERA is going to be like a top 10 pitcher in baseball or something along those lines. Now, the thing that projections most often don't capture are adjustments. And this period of time in spring is really where we start to get a lot of reporting around these. And I would say one of the ways that you can try to identify a guy that will beat his projection most reliably is probably through poking around on some of these ideas of changes, whether it's mechanical or adding a new pitch. The difficult thing is trying to understand what is actually an adjustment that will impact a pitcher in the coming season. Last season, myself, Eno Saris, Nick Pollock, Eric Samolsky, 3 really good baseball minds there, put together this sheet with about 50 names in it of new pitches. Basically, when we saw one of these report online, we tossed in the sheet, eventually aggregated and wrote some pieces off it. Now, again, we're looking at 2025 here, so we could kind of see, did this actually matter for guys? I did a quick sort here, just looking at, okay, definitely had some hits here. Casey Mize made some adjustments. Hurston Waldrop, Gavin Williams, really bad April, but ended up having a very good season. There's a lot of red in here. The funnier ones are the guys that just didn't throw the pitch at all. There's a couple ones like Paul Skeens playing with a 2-seamer and a cutter. Did that really influence him at all in terms of winning the Cy Young? I don't really think so. Griffin Canning's another one. He was good, but then he got hurt. So the hit rate on these, again, is difficult to have in a way that is so successful. We're just looking at a column full of guys who are mostly green. But even with that understanding, I had to jump to this season and track what I've seen so far. Now, this is as of, I believe, about February 16th, and I'm surely missing some things as well. But I've seen about 11 of these ticking around various places. Not a lot of huge names, which I find interesting. So I'm wondering if these have just been buried or if we see them when we start to peer at 2026 spring data. Hayden Birdsong, mechanics change, crochet splitter. This is a short I made. Chase Burns said his curveball and changeup were materially different. Some interesting ones here. I actually wrote about this in my Substack, so if you want to nerd out more and enjoy what I'm talking about here, it's $5 a month, $30 a year. I write every single day, basically, in the season on pitcher adjustments, have some other really cool features. And this article actually isn't up as I'm recording this, but I walked through all the changes that I just showed you right here, and some of them are pretty interesting. So I encourage you to check that out. Link in the video description. And the last thing I'll hit on has to do with large organizational changes. Think about Paul Taboni coming to the Washington Nationals, the Rockies in terms of all the outside voices they brought in, specifically on the pitching side this season. These people are in there to change philosophies and change pitching infrastructure. And as a result of that, I definitely think we're going to see some change in usage. This is something that I don't think projections are going to capture pretty much in any way, but I predict we will definitely see strategic shifts among these two teams, specifically in regards to their fastball usage. We're already seeing workload monitors on some of the Nationals pitchers during live sessions, which is really encouraging from a data standpoint. The Nationals were actually number 1 in Major League Baseball last season at 55% four-seam usage. I wouldn't be surprised if they're bottom 10 this coming season, especially if Taboni takes any of the Red Sox philosophy over into the Nationals org. The Rockies were also 7th in combined four-seam and sinker usage, which is supremely perplexing because Coors Field has some of the worst ball in play results, and four-seamers and sinkers are obviously in play a lot. So again, with full data this spring, we can probably ID that both of these teams are changing philosophies from a usage standpoint, and this is going to trickle down to player level projections. We may also see some shift on the league level as well. I'm always tracking trends. I love looking at four-seam sinker combined usage on the league level, and it seems like over the last couple seasons we've hit some bit of a floor. I just wonder now whether we have two teams in the Nationals and Rockies that are going to cut fastball sinker usage considerably, as I predict, whether this number drops now below, say, 47%, 46.5%. It could be a pretty considerable cut, and I'm curious to see how hitters on the league level adjust. That's all I got for this video. Thanks as always for checking my channel out. Check out my Substack if you haven't already. Have some cool stuff planned coming in March. I'm not going to spoil a ton of it, but you'll want to be locked on this channel. So thanks as always for watching. I'll see you guys soon.